He sold his horse and ranch for $1 to a wounded Apache woman. By dawn, the tribe surrounded his home. Ezekiel had been preparing to shoot his lame horse when she appeared. The Apache woman stumbled from the tree, clutching her bleeding shoulder, and pointed at the animal suffering in his corral. Without speaking, she produced a silver dollar and placed it on his fence post. $1 for everything. His ranch, his dying horse, his 30 years of struggle. What made him accept wasn't desperation, though God knew he had plenty of that. It was the look in her eyes. She didn't want his land, she needed it. And somehow, impossibly, she knew exactly what his property was worth and why he was about to lose it anyway. His creditors were coming tomorrow. The bank foreclosure was already signed. In 12 hours, everything he'd built would belong to men who'd never set foot on this soil. At least this way, his land would go to someone who understood its value. But how did she know about his troubles? How had she found his hidden valley 20 miles from any settlement? And why was she bleeding from what looked like a bullet wound? As he'd helped her inside and started cleaning her injury, he'd noticed shadows moving along the distant ridge. Not random, not hunting, positioned like they were waiting for a signal. The woman had smiled when she saw him notice the watchers. "They wanted to make sure you'd accept the offer," she said in perfect English. "We couldn't risk you saying no." Dawn was coming, and Ezekiel was beginning to understand that his midnight visitor hadn't saved him from losing his property. She'd bought it for reasons he didn't yet comprehend. And those reasons were about to come calling with the sunrise. 6 hours earlier, Ezekiel Marsh had been loading his rifle to put his lame horse out of its misery. Now he sat in a chair that no longer belonged to him, watching the woman who'd paid $1 for his entire life's work, including that dying animal. The horse stood in the corral, no longer suffering. Somehow, during the chaos of their midnight transaction, Ayanna had treated its infected leg with herbs from her pouch. The animal that had been limping toward death was now drinking water and moving freely, just another impossible element in an already impossible night. Ayanna stirred on the makeshift bed he'd prepared by the fireplace. Her shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, but the loss had left her pale and weak. When she'd first opened her eyes and seen him cleaning her injury, there had been no fear, only the calculating gaze of someone executing a carefully planned strategy. The deed lay on his kitchen table, the ink still wet from their strange bargain. He'd signed over everything, the ranch, the water rights, his livestock, and yes, even the horse that should have been dead by morning. She'd written her name with steady penmanship despite her blood loss. Ayanna. The handwriting was educated, controlled, not what he'd expected from someone he'd found bleeding in his corral. What troubled him most was the timing. His creditors were arriving tomorrow to seize the property for unpaid debts. The bank had already processed the foreclosure papers. In 12 hours, everything he'd built would have belonged to men who'd never seen this valley. Her arrival felt less like coincidence and more like precise planning. "You knew," he said quietly about the foreclosure, "about my troubles." She opened her eyes, studying his face. "We've been watching this valley for months. We know when every debt comes due, when every ranch changes hands." Her voice was stronger than it had been hours ago. "Your neighbors talk freely when they drink. Banks keep public records. But why my land specifically?" Before she could answer, a low whistle echoed across the valley, then another from a different direction. The sounds weren't random. They were signals coordinated and purposeful. Ayanna struggled to sit up, her face grave, because what you call your land was ours long before you built fences around it. And soon it will be ours again. Through the window, Ezekiel could see movement along the ridge line, figures on horseback positioned strategically around his property. They weren't hiding anymore. They were announcing their presence. The dollar wasn't payment for the land, he realized aloud. It was payment for something else entirely. Ezekiel didn't move from the window. Safe passage. The words echoed in his mind as he counted the figures positioning themselves along his property line. 12, maybe 15, all on foot, all moving with the kind of discipline that came from years of coordinated hunting. How long have you been planning this? He kept his voice low, but the accusation was clear. Ayanna pulled herself to a sitting position, her face pale, but determined, long enough to know you'd say yes. That's not an answer. She gestured toward the deed on the table. Your ranch sits on a natural spring, the only reliable water source for 50 mi during dry season. My people have been watching it for months, waiting for the right moment. The pieces clicked into place with ugly clarity. The cattle disease that had struck his herd, the sudden aggressiveness of his neighbors' overwater rights, the series of small problems that had slowly strangled his finances until selling seemed like his only option. You orchestrated this. The words came out as a statement, not a question. The diseased cattle, the disputes. My brother is skilled with sick animals, and men with grievances are easy to find when you know what they want to hear. Her matter-of-fact tone made it worse somehow. We needed this land. You needed to leave. It was mutually beneficial. Ezekiel felt something cold settle in his chest. People died from that cattle disease. My neighbor's son got sick trying to save his family's herd. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Regret, maybe, or just annoyance at his moral objections. War requires sacrifice from everyone. War. He turned from the window to face her fully. What war? Before she could answer, a low whistle echoed across the valley, then another from a different direction. The sounds weren't random. They were signals, and they were getting closer. Ayanna struggled to her feet. One hand pressed against her bandaged shoulder. The government surveyors came through here last month. They marked this valley for a new settlement, white families with papers from Washington. They planned to build here within the year. The truth hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. This wasn't just about water. This was about survival, and he just sold the most defensible position in the valley to the people who needed it most. That dollar, he said slowly, it wasn't payment for safe passage. It was payment to make me accomplice. The whistle signals were closer now, almost at his front door. In the distance, he could see torch flames moving through the darkness, too many to be anything other than a war party. Ayanna met his eyes one last time before the first knock echoed through the cabin. Some truths, she said quietly, are more expensive than others. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Ezekiel looked at Ayanna, who had managed to stand despite her wound, and made a decision that would change everything. He walked to the door and opened it. 3 Apache men stood on his porch, their faces painted with red and black stripes. The man in front was older, perhaps 50, with gray threading through his long black hair. His eyes moved from Ezekiel to Ayanna, then to the deed still lying on the kitchen table. Chief Takakota, Ayanna said, her voice carrying a formality that hadn't been there before. She spoke in English clearly for Ezekiel's benefit. It is done. The chief stepped inside without invitation, his companions following. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to command, his gaze taking in every detail of the cabin's interior. When he reached the table, he picked up the deed and examined it carefully. $1, he said, his English heavily accented but precise. You have expensive taste, white man. Ezekiel found his voice. Your people caused the cattle disease, stirred up trouble with my neighbors. You ruined me deliberately. We gave you choices, Takakota replied, setting the deed back down. You chose survival over pride. This is wisdom, not shame. And if I hadn't sold, if I'd fought you instead, the chief's expression didn't change. Then we would have taken it anyway, and you would be dead. The dollar was courtesy. Ayanna moved closer to her chief, favoring her injured arm. The surveyors will return next month with the first families. 20 wagons, maybe 30. They plan to build where the creek bends near the oak grove. Tekakota nodded. And they will find this land already belongs to someone else. Someone with proper papers, signed and witnessed. He looked at Ezekiel. Your government respects ownership. Even when the owner is Apache, the brilliance of their plan struck Ezekiel like cold water. They hadn't just taken his land. They'd made the theft legal using American law against American expansion. The deed in Ayanna's name would hold up in any territorial court, backed by his own signature as witness to the sale. There's more, Ayanna said quietly. The spring that feeds your well also feeds the river downstream. Control the spring. Control the water for every ranch and settlement for 50 mi. You're going to starve them out. Ezekiel realized. We are going to make them choose, Dakota corrected, leave peacefully or fight for water that no longer flows to their lands. One of the younger warriors spoke rapidly in Apache. Takakota's expression darkened as he listened. Then he turned back to Ezekiel. My scout reports riders approaching from the east. 3 men moving fast. They will arrive before dawn. Ayanna's face went pale. Government men worse. Takakota said grimly, bounty hunters. Someone has offered money for Apache scalps, and they believe they have found an easy target. The chief looked directly at Ezekiel. The deed makes this your land now under your protection. What will you do when armed men come to kill your new business partner? Ezekiel stared at the chief, the weight of the question settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Through the window, he could see torches moving closer, the orange flames cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. 3 riders, just as the scout had reported, and they were riding hard. How much time do we have? He asked. Takakota consulted with his warrior in rapid Apache, then turned back. 10 minutes, maybe less. Ayanna struggled to her feet, her face determined despite her obvious pain. There's a root cellar behind the cabin. My people can hide there until they pass. No. Ezekiel's voice surprised everyone, including himself. If those men are bounty hunters, they'll search everywhere. And if they find Apache hiding on my property, he paused, the implications sinking in. They'll assume I'm harboring fugitives. Then we fight, one of the younger warriors said in broken English, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. 3 against 3 aren't good odds when they have rifles, Takakota replied calmly, and the sound of gunfire will bring more trouble. Ezekiel walked to his gun cabinet and removed his hunting rifle, checking the ammunition. The irony wasn't lost on him. 24 hours ago, his biggest worry had been paying next month's feed bill. Now he was preparing to choose sides in what could become a small war. There's another option, he said slowly, an idea forming. The deed is legal. Ayanna owns this land now. That makes me a trespasser, and you her employees. Takakota's eyes sharpened. Explain. Bounty hunters need proof of illegal activity to justify their actions. But if I'm here as Ayanna's hired hand, and you're here as her workers, then we're all conducting legitimate business on private property. Ayanna caught on immediately. The bounty is on Apache raiders, not Apache landowners exactly, but we need to sell the story. Takakota, can your men pass for ranch hands in the dark? The chief considered this perhaps, but what about weapons? Ranch hands carry guns, tools of the trade. Ezekiel moved to the window and peered out. The riders were close enough now that he could make out individual faces. Hard men with the look of professional killers. The key is acting like we belong here. The sound of approaching hoof-beats grew louder. Takakota barked orders to his warriors who quickly hid their war paint and redistributed themselves around the property. One took position near the corral, another by the well. The chief himself moved to stand beside Ayanna, playing the role of her foreman. "And if they don't believe us," Ayanna asked quietly. Ezekiel checked his rifle one more time. "Then we find out how much that dollar was really worth." The hoofbeats stopped outside. 3 shadows dismounted and approached the cabin, spurs jingling with each step. A rough voice called out, "Anyone in there?" "We're looking for Apache raiders. Territorial Marshal sent us to clean out this valley." Ezekiel exchanged one last glance with Ayanna and Takakota. Everything they'd planned, everything they sacrificed would be decided in the next few minutes. He moved toward the door, his finger hovering near his rifle's trigger. "We're just ranch workers here," he called back, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. "What kind of trouble are you boys looking for?" The bounty hunter who spoke was tall and lean with a mustache that drooped past his chin and eyes like chips of flint. His companions flanked him on either side, hands resting casually on their guns belts, professional killers who'd learned to smell fear and weakness from 100 yards away. "Name's Carson Briggs," the tall one said, pushing past Ezekiel into the cabin without invitation. "This here's my operation, and I got papers from the Territorial Marshal authorizing me to search for hostile Apache in this valley." Ezekiel kept his rifle lowered but ready. "Haven't seen any hostiles around here, just trying to get this ranch running again for its new owner." Briggs's eyes found Ayanna, who sat calmly at the kitchen table despite her obvious injury. "New owner, you say? Who might that be?" "Ayanna Marsh," she said without hesitation, using Ezekiel's last name. "I bought this property yesterday. These men are helping me assess what needs repair." "Marsh," Briggs looked between them suspiciously. "You related, wife?" Ezekiel said quickly, hating how easily the lie came. "She's got Apache blood, but she's been living in Santa Fe for years. Knows ranching." One of Briggs's men, a stocky brute with scarred hands, laughed unpleasantly. "Convenient, white man marries and suddenly she owns land." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Takakota, standing by the fireplace in the role of foreman, went very still. Ezekiel could see the warrior fighting every instinct to respond to the insult. "My wife's heritage is none of your concern," Ezekiel said carefully. "She's got proper papers for this land. Signed and witnessed, if you want to see them." "Oh, I've seen plenty of forged papers," Briggs interrupted, moving closer to Ayanna. "Funny thing about Apache, though. They got Tell's little habits that give them away." He reached toward her bandaged shoulder, and that's when everything went wrong. Ayanna flinched away from his touch, her hand instinctively moving to the knife concealed in her boot. The movement was subtle, but Briggs caught it. His eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. "Well, well, wounded Apache woman, 3 Indian men playing ranch hand, and a white man telling lies." He stepped back and drew his pistol in one smooth motion. "Boys, I think we just struck gold." The other bounty hunters drew their weapons, covering Takakota and his warriors. Through the window, Ezekiel could see more men emerging from the darkness. This wasn't just a hunting party. It was a trap. "Here's how this works," Briggs continued, his gun trained on Ayanna. "Apache scalps bring $50 each in Silver City. Your little masquerade might have fooled a regular lawman, but I've been hunting your people for 3 years. I know the smell of war paint under dirt and the sound of Apache when you think white folks can't hear." Dakota spoke for the first time, his voice calm despite the guns pointed at him. "What do you want?" Briggs smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Information. There's a whole band of Apache somewhere in this valley, and you're going to tell me where. Do that, and maybe I let the woman live long enough to watch the rest of you die." Outside, Ezekiel could hear more horses approaching. Reinforcements. The bounty hunters hadn't come to search. They'd come to finish something they'd already started, of course. Briggs added casually, "If you don't cooperate, I'll just burn this place down." and collect scalps from the ashes. Either way, I get paid. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and through the cabin windows, Ezekiel could see at least 6 more riders surrounding the property. They moved with military precision, cutting off every escape route. This wasn't a bounty hunt. It was an execution. 12 men seems like overkill for 4 Apache, Ezekiel said, trying to buy time while his mind raced through impossible scenarios. Briggs chuckled. Oh, we're not here for just 4. See, we've been tracking a whole band for weeks. Lost them in the hills, but then we got word about strange activity at this ranch. Figured if we waited long enough, they'd come to us. You're wrong, Ayanna said quietly. There's no band here. Maybe not yet, but there will be. Briggs moved to the window and gestured to his men outside. My scout counted at least 20 Apache moving through the valley 2 days ago. They'll come here to this water source, and when they do, we'll be ready. Takakota's expression didn't change. But Ezekiel caught the brief flicker in his eyes. The chief knew something Briggs didn't, and that knowledge was either their salvation or their doom. Here's the thing about Apache, Briggs continued. Clearly enjoying his perceived advantage, they're loyal to their own, sometimes stupidly so. Word is already spreading that we got some of their people trapped here. They'll come running to help and walk right into our ambush. You're using us as bait, Ezekiel realized. Smart man. Though I'm curious why you're protecting them. Most white folks would have handed them over by now. Before Ezekiel could answer, one of Briggs's men called from outside. Boss riders coming from the north. Looks like a dozen, maybe more. Briggs grinned and cocked his pistol. Right on schedule, boys. Get ready for some target practice, but Takakota was smiling now, a cold expression that made Briggs take an involuntary step backward. You made one mistake, bounty hunter. And what's that? You assumed we came here alone. The first arrows came through the windows like whispered death, taking down 2 of Briggs' men before they could even cry out. The sound of war whoops filled the air, but they were coming from the south, not the north. The riders Briggs' scout had spotted were a decoy. What the hell? Briggs spun toward the window, just as a flaming arrow struck the cabin's wooden walls. Within seconds, smoke was pouring through the gaps in the logs. Takakota moved with surprising speed for a man his age, tackling one of the remaining bounty hunters and wrestling away his gun. His warriors followed suit, their months of preparation showing in every calculated movement. But Briggs still had his pistol trained on Ayanna, and his expression had shifted from confidence to desperation. The most dangerous transformation a man with a gun could make. Call them off, he shouted over the sound of fighting outside. Call them off or she dies. Ezekiel raised his rifle, but the angle was wrong. Any shot he took risked hitting Ayanna. Through the smoke-filled cabin, he could see the flames spreading along the walls. They had minutes before the whole structure would be engulfed. You can't win this, Ayanna said calmly, even with a gun pointed at her head. Even if you kill us all, you'll never leave this valley alive. Watch me, Briggs snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. I've killed more Apache than you got fingers and toes, girl. What's for more? That's when Ezekiel realized the terrible truth. This had never been about money or bounties. This was personal revenge, and Briggs wouldn't stop until everyone in the cabin was dead. The flames were spreading faster now, licking at the wooden beams above their heads. Smoke filled the cabin, making it hard to breathe and harder to see. Outside, the battle was intensifying, war cries mixing with gunshots in the screams of wounded men. Briggs pressed the barrel of his pistol against Ayanna's temple, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. I know who you are, he hissed. You're Chief Dakota's daughter. The one who killed my brother at Willow Creek. Ayanna's calm facade cracked for the first time. Your brother was leading a massacre against unarmed women and children. He was doing his job. Briggs' voice broke with fury, and you put an arrow through his heart for it. Ezekiel understood now. This wasn't about bounty money or territorial disputes. This was a blood feud that had been years in making, and every person in this burning cabin was about to pay the price for old wounds that refused to heal. "Carson," Ezekiel said quietly, using the bounty hunter's first name deliberately. "Your brother's dead. Killing her won't bring him back. No, but it'll settle the debt." Briggs's finger tightened on the trigger. "Eye for an eye, like the good book says." That's when Takakota spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a lifetime of leadership. "If you want to settle debts, bounty hunter, then settle with me. I gave the order." She was only following her chief's command. "Nice try, old man, but I know Apache customs. Warchiefs don't order executions. Warriors choose their own targets." Briggs never took his eyes off Ayanna. She chose mine. The cabin groaned as flames ate through the support beams. They had maybe 2 minutes before the roof collapsed. Through the smoke, Ezekiel could see that Dakota's warriors had finished off the remaining bounty hunters inside. But the chief himself was trapped behind an overturned table, unable to reach his daughter. Ezekiel made his decision. He set down his rifle and stepped forward, hands visible. "Take me instead." "What? You want revenge? Take it out on me. I'm the one who sold her this land. I'm the one who made your ambush possible." He moved closer, drawing Briggs's attention away from Ayanna. "Without that deed, she never would have been here for you to find." Briggs laughed, but there was hysteria in it now. "You think I care about some white man's guilt? This is between me and her. Then you're a fool," Ezekiel said, taking another step. "Because she's not the one who's been hunting your people for 3 years. She's not the one who turned this into a war instead of justice." For just a moment, Briggs's attention wavered. His eyes flicked toward Ezekiel, and that momentary distraction was all Ayanna needed. She grabbed a burning piece of wood from the fireplace and drove it into Briggs's gun arm. He screamed and jerked backward, the pistol firing wild. Ezekiel lunged forward, tackling the bounty hunter as the burning cabin began to collapse around them. The last thing Ezekiel saw before the roof beam crashed down was Takakota pulling his daughter toward the door, her face streaked with tears and smoke, calling his name through the roar of flames. Ezekiel woke to the sound of water dripping and the smell of charred wood. His left leg was pinned beneath a fallen beam, but he was alive. More importantly, he could feel his toes, which meant the bone wasn't broken. Above him, a section of the cabin roof had burned away completely, letting in the gray light of dawn. Takakota appeared in the gap, looking down with an expression Ezekiel couldn't read. "Can you move?" "I think so." With the chief's help, Ezekiel managed to work his leg free. The limb was bruised and scraped, but functional. Ayanna safe, tending the wounded. Takakota helped him to his feet. The bounty hunters are dead, all of them. They picked their way through the smoldering ruins of what had been Ezekiel's home for 30 years. Outside, the full scope of the battle became clear. Bodies lay scattered across the property. A dozen bounty hunters who had come looking for easy money and found something very different instead. Ayanna sat by the well cleaning a bullet wound on a young Apache warrior's arm. When she saw Ezekiel, relief flooded her face. "I thought the roof had killed you. Takes more than burning wood to finish me off." He looked around at the aftermath. "What happens now?" Takakota studied the horizon where smoke was still rising from the cabin. "The territorial marshal will come when he hears about this. 12 dead bounty hunters is not something that goes unnoticed. And when he does, he will find a legal property owner defending her land against unlawful trespassers." The chief pulled the deed from his jacket, somehow still intact despite the night's chaos. "You made this possible with your signature. The law will protect what the law recognizes." Ezekiel understood the $1 transaction hadn't just been payment for his land. It had been payment for legitimacy. In the eyes of American law, everything that happened here had been legal self-defense on private property. "The government surveyors," he asked. The ones planning to bring settlers will find that the best land in the valley already has an owner who knows how to defend it. Ayanna stood, wiping her hands clean. And who has legal right to control the water that feeds every ranch downstream? The brilliance of their plan was complete now. They hadn't just taken his land. They'd transformed themselves from hunted outlaws into property owners with constitutional rights. The same system that had displaced them from their ancestral territories would now protect their foothold in this valley. That dollar, Ezekiel said slowly, it bought you more than safe passage. It bought us a future, Takakota confirmed. And it bought you a choice. You could have let Briggs kill my daughter and walked away clean. Instead, you chose to stand with us. Ezekiel looked at the ruins of his cabin, then at the faces of the people who had fought beside him. So, what does that make me now? Ayanna smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her since this all began. It makes you family if you want to be. The sun was fully up now, burning away the smoke and revealing the valley in all its harsh beauty. Somewhere to the east, territorial marshals would soon be riding hard toward the sound of yesterday's gunfire. But they would find only a lawful property owner, her legal business partners, and the bodies of men who had died attempting an illegal assault on private land. Ezekiel pulled the silver dollar from his pocket, the same coin Ayanna had placed on his table what felt like a lifetime ago. It was tarnished now, darkened by smoke and blood, but still solid in his palm. Keep it, Ayanna said quietly. Consider it wages for your first day as a ranch hand. He pocketed the coin and looked toward the horizon where their new life was waiting. The best dollar he'd ever earned. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the American frontier, where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.